Hello everybody. It is Tech Talk Tuesday. What are we? Number 47. Is that possible? Yeah. Tech Talk 47. Hey Chris, Matt. Does anybody have the official time right there? I think they can shoot. Everett, Randall, Matt. How you guys? Hey George, Alan, Nat. Just wondered if anybody had the official time. George, Baber, hi GB. GB is watching GB. Harold, Howard, Mohammed. Hey man, way over there. It must be the middle of the night over there. Joanna and Scott. Oh, it's 6. Great. Okay, look, we got 40 on here already, and I want to share with you guys some cool stuff today. There's Ponto, Dave, Freddie. Glad to see you guys look on here. Some of you guys have made this a habit. I have too. Can you believe that I've done 47 of these in a row now? Haven't missed one yet. I don't know how it's possible. With the COVID deal and work, people missing work and folks driving all over America, and hey Mike, my brother, 5 p.m., Wayne Lay. That's some good old friends on there. Hey y'all, look, my shirt's on backwards. The words are backwards. That means this is really not this eye, and this is really not this eye, but those are really swapped. And that engine in the background is backwards, and that's wrong, and that's wrong. That's not even S&S, that's something else. But look, when I swap this around and go to the board I've been drawing on, it will look right. That's just how great this is. And for you guys that fuss about this not being horizontal versus vertical, it really gets jacked up because this phone does what it does. And I do all my videos, in-shot videos, when I'm not live, I do them with it horizontal because it gives you a greater picture, better resolution. And I'm glad to see you guys on here. But look, just look right here where I'm talking and what I'm talking about and stuff like this piston. You know, it's got star spelled backwards on it. But if I swap it around, Jamie, hey, if I swap it around and do this side, let me try it and see if I can prove this. I'm gonna flip it over. Look, it's spelled right. All I did was flip the camera and it's live. Ta-da! Okay, I'm going back the other way because it's not time to do that yet. Okay. I know it's crazy, I'm learning too. Will, Gary, Pat, Ed, hi y'all. Okay, so I have this custom piston. This one is a very small 4.4 bore. Small block Chevys, Chryslers, Fords. 4.4 bore. That seems pretty big, but when the Harleys it's not that big because on our pro stock Harleys we ran over 5 inches. So this is a little piston to us. And this is gas ported. Use the other end of the pin. There's a little baby hole drilled here, and all the way around I got little holes. And my notes that I order these pistons custom, I put up to 12. And I have big valve pockets that are for big diameter valves, and they're deep enough for TDC lift. And I also, hey Kim, Nitro Blue on the phone there, Edgar, Jim. And then we have these big exhaust pockets that are also deep enough for people that has crazy ideas on TDC lift. Now, that's another story for another day, but when your just in my estimation, if your camshaft has a little bit too much duration for having some really good flowing heads, a lot of folks waste the capability of the engine by opening the intake valve too soon, which means you got to be careful that the valve hits the piston here when it opens because the piston's near the top when the valve opens. Matter of fact, TDC lift means what is the lift of the valve at top dead center. So when the piston's sitting right here and this pocket is this deep and your valve hits, that means that your TDC lift is really crazy. Now think about this just for a minute, y'all. This piston's coming up. It's coming up. And the intake valve is coming up on the exhaust stroke, and 30 degrees before it gets to the top, the intake valve opens, and this is coming up, so it's pushing the exhaust out, and the intake's coming in. So when it gets to TDC and you have 0.200 TDC lift, That means when the piston stopped at the top, your intake valve is open 200 thousandths of an inch already, and the piston's not even moving. So when the piston turns around and goes down on the intake stroke, the intake valve comes in real fast and chases this piston down. And then when the piston stops, the valve goes to full lift. And then when the piston turns around and comes back up on the compression stroke, you want this intake valve to close so that that compression doesn't bleed back out the intake valve. That's another day. But I wanted to tell you about the ring package. This one has 043 rings, 043 top ring, 043 second ring, and a 3mm oil ring. This seals up very, very nice. This is not a super high RPM engine. This piston works great up to 7,000 RPM. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it if I do it up close, but there is a pressure balance groove. A lot of companies use this now. It's right here. Is that clear? Nope, clear as mud. Anyway, that pressure balance groove right there is so when the combustion pressure gets by this top ring, which it will, you can't help it, it will leak past this top ring and it will get built up on top of the second ring. And the second ring here is just an oil scraper, and it transfers heat out of the piston into the cylinder wall. So this ring gets really hot. This ring gets so hot that it's got to have room to dissipate the heat. This ring gets hot too, but when the pressure goes past this top ring and gets built up on top of the second ring, you want this balance groove, this pressure balance groove, to absorb some of that volume so it doesn't lift this ring off early. And the subject of my story today about lifting the ring off early has to do with piston speed. Big G, Mopar man, wow, from down under. That looks better down under. I know, I'm just being silly. Thank you for watching all the way from Australia. It's already tomorrow there. Lucky for y'all. I guess we need to call you and ask you what happened today, huh? You might have seen the news. I know I'm being stupid. This is a plus 15cc dome. That's great if you have a big chamber. The dome volume, when you say plus 15, that means this is a negative dome volume, this is negative dome volume, this is negative, negative. So all those are negative. Unless this piston was totally flat with no pockets, it would be 0 volume. These pockets are deep enough to maybe fill with 5 or 6 or maybe 10 cc's. They're big enough, deep enough. So a plus 15 means it's 15 more than what it took to fill these pockets up. That's another piece of info right there. Now, when the piston's going up really fast and it stops at top dead center, the rings are trying to hang on for dear life. The piston, when it goes peak piston speed, it's running over 10,000 feet per minute at peak speed. One thing we measure as engine builders, and you guys will be able to do research on it, is average piston speed. The average piston speed is how fast the piston is going to go from the bottom to the top, top to the bottom, and back. What is the average speed that the piston took to go from TDC to the bottom and back to the top? That's 1 crankshaft revolution. Piston down, piston back up. That's 1 crankshaft revolution. During that time, the average speed counting sitting dead stop at the top, I mean dead stop, it ain't moving none, to the bottom, and it's dead stop. At 7,000 RPM, this piston stops twice in 1 revolution. It stops at the top just for a moment, and then it jerks it back down, the rod does. And then when it's going to the bottom, it stops, and then it goes right back up to the top and stops again. So it stops at the top, stops at the bottom, stops at the top, and the average piston speed is counting the 10,000 feet per minute it does in the middle of that, and the stop, and slowly pulling away from top, slowly stopping at the bottom, slowly driving away from the bottom, going really fast through the middle, and slowing down the stop again. And the average piston speed is somewhere around 5,000 or 6,000 feet per minute. Now, I want to show you a little bit about it, and also I want to tell you why it's important. And I'm going to show you this chart first, and then we're going to talk about why this is important, all right? Let's flip you around. Hey, Donald, Anthony, all my friends there. Let's move this a little bit closer and see if I can get rid of that glare. There you go. All right, can y'all see that okay right there? Engine type, which these are listed here, 126, 145, 143, 124, stock, blah, 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 blah. I got them all, and we'll go over them. I want to tell you about them. the stroke, the maximum RPM that you would turn this engine, and this is very approximate because there are lots. Some of these guys only go 5,500, some go 7,200, but this is the average piston speed at this RPM with this stroke, with this style engine. So this 126, some of you guys, we sold probably 30 or 40 of those in the day. We used to have an exclusive on those with S&S when we first came out with them. It was one of their first big bore short stroke engines. It had a 4 3/8 bore and a 4.1875 stroke, which was totally against their S&S's kind of company rule, because back in the day, there was no good valve train available. There was no lightweight parts. There was no lightweight valves. There were real flimsy push rods, and they thought that the only way to get cubic inches was to put a lot of stroke in it, and the stroke lowers the RPM a bunch, and you'll see why. Now, this 126 engine right here, this engine really loves RPM. It does good at 7,000, and with this little baby short crankshaft, this average piston speed was only 4,885. Now, as you go by, and we'll compare these with some other numbers on the board, you'll realize that that is an endurance piston speed. When I say endurance, that means it's made to run a long time at that range. Now, you step down, you remember the Tribute 145, it was a 4 3/8 bore with a 4.8125 crankshaft. That is almost 5-inch stroke. That is a lot of stroke. And we tore these up and ran them at the same RPM as the 126 because we didn't know better. And if the valve train in this 126 was good enough with light valves and stiff push rods and some good valve springs, if this engine was good enough to run 7,000 valve train wise, this engine also, it had the same head, same valve train, same valves, everything. And it would turn 7,000, but good googly moogly, look at that, 5,600 feet per minute. Now, that's the average, you guys. That's the average speed of the piston, counting going all the way up and stopping, going all the way down and stopping, and going back to the top and stopping. That's average speed. That means at TDC it's at 0. That means at the bottom it's 0, and at the top again it's 0. So going from 0 to there, and from there back to 0, it's 5,600 feet. Now, the new engines you can buy, the T143 for twin cam and the T124 twin cam, they have a really nice stroke as a 4.625. This is very common. S&S makes a lot of these. They're a really nice 3-piece crank now. We turn them 7,000 RPM, and that's a really nice combination between these two. The 126 is really slow piston speed. The 145 was really fast, and this one is a nice 5395. I'm gonna call it 5,400 feet per minute. Paul made it, David, Truman, Scott Shaffer, man. That's a hero right there. Scott Shaffer, right there. Thank you for watching, Scott. We appreciate you. All right, so going through this piston speed story here, let's let this board down a little bit. See if I can see what I'm talking about. All right. Go to a stock Milwaukee 8, a 107. Has a 4.375 stroke. That's a good automotive stroke crank too. 7,000 RPM. It's got a really nice, comfortable 5,100 feet per minute. That'll last for a long time. That's a lot of speed. These engines only turn 5,500 until we do work to them. And if you want to turn it 7,000, it's not going to hurt it at 5,100. Valve train wise or piston speed wise. The stock M8 with the 114 and the 117 is a really nice 4.5 stroke. Same RPM, because the valve train that we control with the cams and the valves and the springs and the push rods with this engine can turn 7,000 easy, just like this engine can, but we're pushing our luck at 5,250. Interesting number right there, 5,250. That's where torque and horsepower cross on all dyno sheets. Isn't that funny? The M8 with this 4.5 stroke crank has, at 7,000 RPMs, has 5,250. To be super scientific and technical, 5252 is the number where the horsepower and torque crosses on all dyno sheets. Hey, but that's another day. NHRA Pro Stock 500s. Their NHRA limit of 10,500 RPM with a 3.5 stroke, 3.55. It gets a good 6212. Now, back 2, 3, 4 years ago when they used to have this no RPM limit, and Jason Line and Greg and some of them guys were turning 12,000, this number right here was crazy. And this other guy that was just on here watching, his name was Scott Shaffer. He's somewhere on here. He knows about the 5-inch stroke mountain motors and the 5 1/8 stroke. And John Kazi, Those mountain motor guys, man, they were doing 8,000 feet per minute. I don't even know how the rods, wrist pins, or the pins, I don't even know how the rings stayed sealed up. They probably don't. Okay. Go to NHR. Oh man, I bumped into the camera, I'm sorry. Let's see how I can get rid of some of this so I can see what I'm talking about. I'll try it. I'll try and do it. Top fuel, NHRA, nitro funny cars, nitro top fuel is running 4.5 stroke. They have a mandated RPM limit of 8,000. They're turning 63.75. These engines, with their clutch management, they run an average of about 7,800 RPM average from the start line to the finish line, maybe 7,600, but it's somewhere in that number. And I got to tell you about this number right here, this 8,000. Average piston speed, feet per minute, 63.75. This right here, if they average RPM from, say, the starting line to the finish line, they may average about 7,800. This is a very interesting stat. I did some cool math that you can do at home that's fun, is I took this engine and I took 8,000 RPM and I divided it by 60 seconds and it gave me a number per second how many RPM it ran average down the track, and then I times it to 3.7 it takes to go down the racetrack, and the crankshaft goes from the starting line to the finish line on a top fuel that turns 8,000 RPM. Crankshaft goes only rotates 480 times from the starting line to the finish line. Crankshaft goes 480 times. Isn't that hard to believe? Now, go down to the next line. Can you guys see this okay? I don't know how far off the page I am or if I'm on, because I'm thankful for all these names right here that I don't know how to work the phone. There's a lot of cool names here, and they are in the way of what I'm pointing at, so I'm gonna use my other eye. I got two eyes, one of them works better than the other one. But anyway, the F1, the V6 turbo, has a 2-inch crank. That's 2-inch stroke. They have a mandated 15,000 RPM. Their peak piston speed is only 52.17. Now, if you look back at the other numbers, you can see that is for sure. You're listening to a Formula One turbo go 15,000 RPM, and just 10 years ago, they were running 20,000 RPM, and they had little short cranks, and they were turning them a little bit faster. But this is how they live. And I don't know this rule, so don't quote me on this, but that 52.17 average piston speed and that 15,000 RPM in this stroke, these engines are sealed, and they have to run them for a lot of races. Somebody might even tell us, but I think it's like the engines are sealed, and they have to stay in the car through several races all over the world. And that 52.17 number is one way they're able to do that, because they have the valve train totally under control, because 10 years ago they used to run 5,000 more RPM than this, okay? So this thing is handled, and this speed right here is how they keep the bottom end and the engines together 480 times. I know, John, isn't that amazing math? Okay, now go to the Cup cars, NASCAR, right? It's a 3 1/4 crank. There's a lot of V8s, little motors like that. The 3.25 crank, and they have a 9,400 RPM mandated rev limiter. That's 5092. Look at that. That has a slower piston speed than the Formula One car at 15,000. Yeah, you figured it would, but look at the stroke difference. It's almost 1 1/4 inches difference in the stroke. All right. IndyCar, 1.5 stroke. Woo, what a baby. IndyCar, 1.5 stroke, 12,000 RPM is a sanction limit. And that, look at the, these are crate motors they buy. GM and Honda, I think, and I'm talking out of turn. But anyway, 3,000 feet per minute. That engine should last forever and forever and forever. 3,000. That right there is like a passenger car. You think going 12,000 RPM is hard on parts? 4-valve engine with a perfect valve train with cam overhead, and they got double overhead cams, and that's only 3,000 feet. That'll last for a long time. Now let's go to the NHRA V-twin, the Harley team, the S&S 160s. They have a 3.875 stroke that I know about. I don't know what the Harley team has. It's a secret. Nobody can have one but them. But that 3.87 stroke, we turn at 10,500 RPM, and that is a whopping 67.81. That is a lot of speed. And then the Pro Stock Suzukis down here at the bottom, 2.89. That has slowly grown. That was they were running a little crank, then a medium crank, and now a really big crank, because every time the V-twins would go faster, they would give these guys more cubic inches, but they already had the biggest bore that would fit. So the only way they could add cubes was to put more stroke in it. So every time they put stroke in it, they kept adding this speed up. So now 2.89 at 14,000 RPM, this unit's turning 67.43. That's average feet per minute. Now look at the number right here. This is pretty crazy to me. This number, the V-twins at 10,500 have a 6,700 piston speed, and the 4-cylinders at 14,000 have the same piston speed, average 67. Now, at the very bottom down there, I wrote RPM times stroke divided by 6 gives you the feet per minute. Average, y'all, please understand average. And you have no idea how fast that is at peak speed. I don't. There's math. It's pretty easy to do. You can look it up if you Google it, max piston speed. I know it's real close. It's not at 90 degrees like you would think. Halfway from the top, halfway to the bottom, it'd be going the fastest. It's not. The rod ratio changes that so that when the rod and the crank are at 90 degrees to each other, that's about 75 to 80 degrees after top is when the piston's going the fastest. And at, say, 10,000 RPM, at 10,000 RPM, the piston is trying to go from 0 to 10,000 feet per minute in just a nanosecond in a very short distance. So the piston is a blinding blur. And the piston goes up and down 200 times a second on these really fast piston speeds, and 100, 125 times a second on these really slow piston speeds. But if you can do this, let's do a second, and let's do our finger up and down 4 inches. Our finger up and down 4 inches, okay? Do that 150 times in 1 second. Wow, how does the ring stay attached? This is where I'm going with all this piston speed story. When this piston is going this fast, okay, and the piston goes to the top and stops. So it's like, you've heard of things stopping fast, like you throw out 2 parachutes, you have a fighter plane comes in on the aircraft carrier and it has to grab the tail hook and grab all the cables, so stop it. It goes from 100 miles an hour to 0 in about 30 feet. These pistons are way more brutal, but they have stuff attached to them. They have wrist pins in the rods, they have circlips, they have pistons, and they have rings. And all this stuff is as one for a few seconds, or no, a few moments, a few nanoseconds. These parts are connected, and when the piston stops, the wrist pin keeps going, the rod hangs on for dear life, the top of the rod hangs on, the rod bearings hang on for dear life, and the darn rings keep going. So the mail order pistons, or the pistons you buy in kits, these rings, they make these really loose so you can buy anybody's ring and use anybody's piston, and this stuff flops around. On a real high quality piston, you have to control the rings. And one way you control the rings is by running lighter rings. And that's what this whole deal is about. Because when you're running those 16th rings, or you're running the 043s or whatever, there's some rings that are really heavy, and when the piston stops, the rings keep going. It can't help it, it's inertia. And when it goes, every time it breaks the seal from the ring to the piston, it loses seal and it has to reattach itself later. And then it loses seal again at the bottom. Then it loses seal again at the top. And it has to reattach itself every time. And remember, I'm talking about 150 times a second. It loses seal, grabs seal, loses seal, grabs seal. So you got to keep the piston speed down. You have to keep the ring weight down so the inertia doesn't tear that seal off. And when every time this happens, you guys, the combustion pressure leaks by and goes in the bottom end. And when it pressurizes the bottom end, all the oil pukes out the breathers. Think about these guys right here with the NHRA top fueler. Where is that bad boy? Right there. 4.5 stroke, 8,000 RPM, 6,300. They have a puke tank on the top fuel cars and on the funny cars. I don't know how many times bigger it is than the cubic inches of the engine, but it's 2 or 3 times the cubic inches of the engine. So when you hole a piston or you blow a cylinder, it's supposed to contain the pressure, and all the oil is supposed to stay in that tank. But man, you have no idea what pressure that is when it happens. I remember when I was racing a long time ago with the close call racing team, we had pro stock bikes and we had funny cars and top fuelers and And I remember Bernie's Miss Budweiser boat was painted up close call. We had Bodine had a close call stock car. And I remember racing with Jim Head, and he was the first guy I knew that took a sensor and put it in his oil pan, and it had it hooked to a little dummy light on the dash of his top fuel car. And when the pressure in the pan would go to a Murphy switch, it would light that up. And when Jim was driving his car, no matter how fast it was going, no matter how hard it was pulling, the red light would come on. He would lift and pull over towards the wall. And he was telling me that that was to avoid oil downs, because he was trying to help NHRA control oil downs. He came up with a lot of good ideas. He's a real innovator. And he said, as soon as the pan pressure goes up, he said, you're getting ready to blow everything out. So he tried to get a head start on the combustion pressure going by the rings into the pan, and as soon as the pan would expand, say 10, 15 PSI, the light would come on, like an oil light in your car. And he would back the throttle off and pull over, because it was going to blow any instant. I mean, not even a second. That's really hard reaction time right there. You think cutting a light's hard? How about getting pulled back like that with 6 G's pulling your head and your eyeballs back, and then your red light comes on, you got to lift right then. That's pretty interesting to learn that stuff from him. But anyway, this math right here is what helped us realize the peril that we are in. Cylinder wall clearance is important. The cylinder wall finish is important. The ring lands are very, very important. And the ring design is very important. So as we get tighter and tighter with our clearances here, we were having micro welding of the rings would try to micro weld to the ring land. And one reason it is because the ring was getting too hot, because the piston speed was too big, and the ring was creating so much friction. Total Seal's done a good job. So has some of the other ring companies doing a good job building better rings, better finish. We can tighten up the clearances because the rings are totally flat and the ring lands are totally flat. And these gas ports are sealing us tight. When the combustion pressure blows through these ports, it seals the rings to the cylinder wall. But that's not very long. Remember, the engine goes 720 degrees revolution. It goes intake stroke, compression stroke, power stroke, exhaust stroke. That takes 2 full turns, okay? When these rings, when the gas ports are working, that is only on the power stroke. And it's only till the pressure builds big, near TDC, maybe just a little before TDC, and then after 90 degrees after top, the pressure is falling a little bit. And these, out of 720 degrees, these gas ports only pressurize the ring for not even 20% of the time. So out of 720 degrees, these gas ports are only enabled or enacting. They're acting against the back of the ring for, say, 100 degrees, maybe 110 degrees of 720 degrees. So people say gas ports are no good for this, and they don't know. They just know what they read. And back in the day, if you put gas ports in everybody.com's piston, and you put gas ports in it, and you use anybody else's .com rings, the gas ports don't do anything because there's no control of the clearances or the sealing here, okay? And I'm not bad-mouthing other companies or anything. I'm just saying this is something that needs more attention in a high-performance engine than we need in a passenger car. Oh, get you a brand new Corvette. No, probably can't get one. I can't. You can order a piston online and order a set of rings from Chevrolet. You can get one and look at it, and you will be shocked at what the ring looks like. You'll be shocked at what the piston looks like. Even the factory OEMs are using pro stock technology on rings now. The first time I saw it, I think it was an early Gen 1 ZX14. It had tiny rings on a Kawasaki ZX14. It was really high quality. It looked like had forged pistons, had really nice rods, and it had tiny Formula One style rings on an OEM part that the factory would turn 12,000 RPM, and you could last however long those engines last. I know they last a long time. And it's time that us Harley guys catch up to that technology, because when you order piston kits online from the high dollar, the high name, the big names, they're running the same stuff here and the same rings they've been running for decades. Car companies too, not OEM, not trendsetters, but part sellers. And when we buy a new S&S engine, a brand new 143 or a brand new T124, we offer the customer an upgrade where we bore and hone the cylinders to the next size, and we put our piston and ring package in it, and we pick up horsepower because we control the ring seal like it should be. Ring gaps are another story. I see I'm out of time. I have a lot left on this. I got excited talking about piston speed because I've been learning about it and I've been experiencing it and talking about it for a really, really long time. And there is a lot of friction that goes on right here. 150 times a second, up and down, up and down, up and down. And there's a different deal going on. 180 here, 180 here, 180 here, 180 here. That is 720 degrees rotation. The first one is intake stroke. Next one, compression stroke. Next one is the power stroke. The next one is the exhaust stroke. And they all overlap onto each other. More news, more stories, another time. Thank you all. Please stay safe during the COVID deal. And I noticed that at Hogs Going Wild race this past weekend in Georgia, we had everybody there, every type of person, every race, everything, and we all got along great because we were all there with the same goal. And that can go on everywhere if we really work on it. So it's got to be in your heart first. May God bless you all. Good night. Thank you. Stay tuned. Send me messages. I enjoy hearing from you. Bye.